The crystal arches of Apex Point shimmered against the obsidian night sky, casting a cold, diamond-like glow over the elite of the city. At 34, Vivian Davenport was a name whispered with equal parts reverence and terror in the boardrooms of Davenport Aerospace. Tonight, her neck was adorned with a priceless sapphire necklace, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp as ice. But as she swept through the main dining room, her 6-year-old son, Leo, tugged frantically at the silk of her tailored emerald gown. The boy looked pale, his chest heaving slightly as he whispered that the suffocating crowd of paparazzi and high society sycophants outside had pushed him over the edge. Vivian froze, her protective instincts warring with her carefully constructed public mask. She was preparing to guide him to the secluded ultra-VIP glass pavilion when Leo suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His small, trembling hand pointed toward a quiet, dimly lit corner booth. There sat a man in a faded, heavily washed denim shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms lined with faint, silver scars. This was Garrett Mercer. At 36, Garrett looked weathered, his face etched with the quiet masculinity of a man who had stared down hell and chosen peace instead. He was currently working 16-hour days, splitting his time as an overnight aircraft structural mechanic at a regional cargo hangar and a daytime courier, doing everything within his power to provide a stable life for his 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. Right now, Garrett was completely oblivious to the billionaires around him. He was smiling warmly, his entire universe focused on using a dull butter knife to meticulously carve a piece of simple roasted chicken into perfect, uniform shapes for Chloe, who was giggling uncontrollably. Leo was utterly transfixed by the sight. He looked up at his mother, his voice a vulnerable whisper, asking if they could sit right next to them because that father looked safe. Vivian frowned, her corporate mindset instantly analyzing the scene. She told her son to stop staring at the ordinary table, reminding him of their reserved, secure seating. But Leo refused to budge, his small fingers tightening on her dress. He pleaded, saying he wanted to be near the girl who was laughing so happily. For a woman whose life was dictated by cold logistics and multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, seeing her usually withdrawn, silent son show such raw emotion was a shock. It occurred to her that her immense wealth had bought Leo a massive estate and endless nannies, but it had never bought him genuine joy. Before Vivian could make her move, the snobbish floor manager Julian hurried over, his face twisted in a sycophantic grimace. He whispered urgently to Vivian, suggesting that the man and his child were a clerical error, that they had accidentally been seated in the premium tier after wandering in from the street level, and that he would have security remove them immediately to preserve the atmosphere of the establishment. Vivian looked from the manager's condescending eyes to her son's pleading expression. Her sharp, aristocratic edge returned in full force. She told the manager flatly that her son made the decisions tonight, and that he would not touch that family. Without waiting for an answer, Vivian walked directly over to Garrett's unassuming corner table. Garrett looked up, his deep green eyes meeting hers, and for a split second, a flicker of intense, analytical recognition passed through his gaze before he masked it with the tired expression of a working-class father. Vivian skipped all pleasantries, her voice direct and commanding, stating that her son wished to join their table and asking if they could sit. Chloe, delighted by the prospect of a new friend, clapped her hands and welcomed them. Garrett, though visibly flustered by the sudden presence of the most powerful aerospace tycoon in the country, quietly stood up and pulled out a chair for her with an effortless, fluid grace that felt entirely out of place for a simple mechanic. As the two children instantly began chatting about school and drawings, an intense, heavy silence fell between Vivian and Garrett. They were two individuals from completely opposite ends of human existence, yet both were anchored by a fierce devotion to their children. Vivian watched as Garrett calmly finished cutting his daughter's food, his movements showing an incredible, steady precision. Leo leaned over, watching Garrett's hands with absolute fascination. The boy then looked up with heartbreaking vulnerability and asked Garrett if he could cut his food too, completely bypassing his mother. Vivian's heart stopped. Leo never trusted strangers, let alone asked for affection from anyone outside their tiny circle. But before she could speak, a loud, mocking laugh echoed from a nearby table. Eleanor Montgomery, a notorious high society critic, spoke loudly enough for the surrounding elite to hear, remarking that the great Davenport dynasty had apparently resorted to dining with low-wage laborers, wondering if the company's stock was crashing along with its CEO's standards. The entire restaurant fell silent, waiting for Vivian's reaction, while the waiter approached Garrett with a sneer, demanding to see his credit card to ensure he could even afford the basic water on the table. Garrett merely lowered his eyes, enduring the humiliation in silence to protect his daughter from a scene, but the air in the room grew suffocatingly tense as Vivian's eyes flashed with a dangerous protective fury. The silence in the Apex Point dining room was absolute, heavy, with the weight of unbreathed air. Vivian slowly turned her head, her gaze locking onto Eleanor Montgomery with the devastating precision of a guided missile. The Billionaire CEO did not raise her voice, but the sudden drop in temperature around the table was palpable. "Eleanor," Vivian said, her tone a soft, lethal purr that carried effortlessly across the crystal-lit room. "Your family's trust fund has been bleeding capital for a decade. Your husband is currently dodging a federal tax audit, and your taste in company is as artificial as your jewelry. Do not ever speak to me or anyone at this table again." Eleanor's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like a stranded fish. The sheer, radiating authority from Vivian stripped her of any counterattack. Humiliated and shaking, Eleanor grabbed her designer clutch and practically fled the dining area, the sound of her heels echoing loudly in the dead quiet of the restaurant. Vivian then turned her terrifying, icy focus to the waiter, who was still holding his tablet, frozen in place. "The bill for this table goes to my corporate account," Vivian commanded. "If you ever speak to a guest of mine with that tone again, I will personally buy this establishment just to fire you. Walk away." The waiter, pale and trembling, stammered a frantic apology and rushed off toward the kitchens. Vivian let out a slow, controlled breath, her corporate armor still fully engaged. She turned back to the table, expecting the mechanic to be shrinking under the weight of the spectacle. Instead, she found Garrett Mercer looking at her with a calm, unbothered expression. He hadn't flinched. He wasn't intimidated by her wealth or her explosive display of power. "You didn't have to do that, miss." "Davenport," Garrett said. His voice was low, rich, and steady. "I pay for my own daughter's meals." "I despise bullies," Vivian replied smoothly, though she was internally caught off guard by his absolute lack of subservience. Most men in her world bowed to her status. Garrett looked at her as if she were just another human being. "My dad doesn't need anyone to pay for us," Chloe chimed in, her bright eyes flashing with sudden, fierce loyalty. She puffed out her small chest. "He works on the biggest airplanes in the world. He keeps everyone safe in the sky." Leo, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, looked at Garrett in pure awe. "You fix airplanes?" "My mom builds them." Garrett smiled, a genuine, warm expression that instantly softened the rugged lines of his face. He reached out and gently ruffled Leo's perfectly styled hair, a gesture that would have normally sent Vivian's security detail into a frenzy. But Leo just leaned into the touch, a massive, rare grin spreading across his face. "Your mom builds some very impressive machines, Leo," Garrett said softly. "I just make sure the pieces stay together." Vivian studied Garrett's hands. They were undeniably the hands of a laborer, calloused and scarred. Yet, his posture was impossibly straight, his shoulders squared, his eyes constantly scanning the room with a quiet, situational awareness that screamed military training. There was a profound stillness to him, a deliberate control that contradicted the faded denim and the exhaustion etched under his eyes. Before Vivian could probe further, her private satellite phone vibrated violently against the mahogany table. Only one person had that direct line. She answered it immediately. "Vivian, we have a critical situation." The panicked voice of Arthur Pendleton, her chief operating officer, filtered through the receiver. "The Vanguard 9 prototype at the desert testing facility. They're running the high-altitude simulated stress test and the telemetry is going haywire." Vivian's blood ran cold. The Vanguard 9 was Davenport Aerospace's multi-billion-dollar crown jewel, a next-generation heavy transport jet designed to secure a massive government defense contract. A catastrophic failure now would tank the company's stock and ruin a decade of research. "Define haywire, Arthur," Vivian demanded, her voice tight, completely forgetting the restaurant, the dinner, and the mechanic sitting across from her. "The exhaust gas temperatures are spiking dangerously past redline on engine 2, but the turbine RPM is dropping," Arthur shouted over the background noise of alarms in his command center. "The engineers are screaming compressor stall, but cutting the fuel flow isn't stopping the thermal runaway. They are 90 seconds from a catastrophic engine housing meltdown. We're going to lose the entire prototype." Vivian's hand trembled slightly. She was a brilliant businesswoman, a master of logistics and acquisitions, but she was not a structural engineer. She closed her eyes, the immense pressure of her empire threatening to crush her right there in the dining chair. Leo, sensing his mother's sudden, overwhelming panic, began to breathe heavily. His small hands gripped the edge of the table, his chest heaving as an anxiety attack triggered by her stress began to take hold. Garrett noticed instantly. Moving with fluid, practiced speed, he slid out of his booth and knelt beside Leo. He placed a large, warm hand over the boy's racing heart, whispering a rhythmic, calming cadence, instructing the child to match his breathing. Within seconds, Leo's panic subsided, anchored by Garrett's steady presence. But Garrett wasn't just listening to Leo. He was listening to the muffled, frantic voice leaking from Vivian's phone. As Vivian prepared to give the agonizing order to abandon the test facility and let the multi-million-dollar engine destroy itself, Garrett stood up. He leaned over the table, his deep green eyes locking onto Vivian's panicked gaze. The humble, tired father vanished, instantly replaced by a man radiating absolute, unquestionable authority. "Tell them to stop looking at the compressor," Garrett said, his voice cutting through the panic with surgical precision. Vivian froze, staring at him in shock. "What?" "If the EGT is spiking, but the RPM is dropping on a high bypass turbofan during a simulated high-altitude test, it is not a compressor stall," Garrett stated coldly, reciting the highly classified flight dynamics as if reading a children's book. "It's a cascading failure in the variable stator vanes. They are locked out of phase. Tell your engineers to manually override the FADEX system and bleed the bypass valves, or that engine housing will detonate in exactly 45 seconds. Vivian stared at the man in the faded denim shirt, her mind violently short-circuiting. The information he had just delivered with absolute ice-cold certainty was highly classified. Not even her mid-level engineers had access to the variable stator vane telemetry of the Vanguard 9, yet this stranger had diagnosed a cascading failure from a few panicked words leaking through a phone speaker. "Vivian!" Arthur's voice screamed through the receiver, pulling her back to the immediate crisis. "Did you hear me? The engine is about to go critical." Garrett did not break eye contact. His green eyes held a fierce, unwavering command that demanded total obedience. He gave her a single, sharp nod. It was the nod of a man accustomed to making life and death decisions in the blink of an eye. "Arthur, listen to me very carefully." Vivian barked into the phone, her voice suddenly steady, borrowing the stranger's unshakable confidence. "Manual override on the FADEX system. Bleed the bypass valves. Now." "Vivian, that's insane!" Arthur yelled over the blaring klaxons in his control room. "The chief engineer says that will starve the core!" I don't care what the chief engineer says, Arthur." Vivian's voice echoed through the silent, opulent dining room, turning the heads of every billionaire and socialite present. "I am giving you a direct order. Override the FADEC and bleed the valves. Execute." 10 agonizing seconds passed. The silence stretching from the phone speaker felt like a physical weight pressing down on Vivian's chest. She watched Garrett, who was now calmly stroking Leo's back, his massive hand providing a steady, rhythmic comfort to her trembling son. Garrett wasn't looking at the phone. He was looking at his watch, counting down the seconds with eerie precision. Then, the chaotic noise in the background of the call shifted. The high-pitched, terrifying whine of a turbine tearing itself apart slowly descended into a deep, stable hum. The blaring alarms in the desert testing facility abruptly ceased. "My God," Arthur breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sheer relief. "The core temperature is dropping, the stator vanes realigned, the engine is stabilizing. We saved the prototype. Vivian, how did you know?" The telemetry didn't even show a phase lock until just this second. "Secure the facility, Arthur," Vivian whispered, her throat dry. "I'll call you back." She ended the call and slowly lowered the phone to the table. Her hands were shaking. She looked across the booth at Garrett. He had already turned his attention back to his daughter, carefully wiping a smudge of sauce from Chloe's chin with a napkin. The commanding, lethal aura he had projected moments ago vanished instantly, replaced by the gentle, exhausted demeanor of a blue-collar father. "Who are you?" Vivian asked, her voice low, trembling with a mixture of awe and deep suspicion. Garrett didn't look up immediately. He finished wiping his daughter's face, offered her a warm smile, and then met Vivian's intense gaze. "I'm just a mechanic, Miss Davenport. I spend a lot of time around jet engines." "Do not lie to me." Vivian said, leaning forward, the sapphire necklace catching the dim light. You just recited the classified operational limits of a next-generation military turbofan that hasn't even been unveiled to the Pentagon. You didn't guess. You knew. You knew exactly how many seconds it had left. Before Garrett could formulate a deflection, a slow, mocking applause broke the tension. A tall man, in a tailored silver suit, strolled over from the adjacent VIP lounge. Preston Vance, the ruthless CEO of Zenith Aeronautics, Davenport's fiercest competitor, wore a smirk that practically dripped with venom. He had clearly been eavesdropping on the entire ordeal. Brilliant theater. Vivian. Preston sneered, stopping at the edge of their table. Truly, it takes a special kind of desperation to have your company's catastrophic failures broadcasted over dinner. Sounds to me like the Vanguard 9 is $1 billion paperweight. Vivian's spine stiffened. Mind your own business, Preston. My prototype is perfectly stable. Stable? Preston laughed loudly, drawing the eyes of the surrounding elite. You were screaming about engine meltdowns a minute ago, and worse, you're taking advice from... What is this? Preston gestured dismissively at Garrett's worn clothing, his eyes filled with aristocratic disgust. Did you pull a grease monkey off the tarmac to play chief engineer? No wonder Davenport Aerospace is losing the defense contract to us. You're relying on the help. Garrett remained seated. He didn't flush with anger. He didn't shrink away. He slowly picked up his water glass, took a measured sip, and set it down. You're Preston Vance, Garrett said softly, his voice carrying a dangerous, quiet edge. Obviously, Preston scoffed, adjusting his silk tie. And you are in the wrong building, pal. The service entrance is around back. Zenith Aeronautics, Garrett continued, completely ignoring the insult. He tilted his head, studying Preston with the detached curiosity of a predator analyzing prey. You're pushing the new Kestrel rotorcraft for the Navy's Deep Water Search and Rescue Initiative. Preston puffed out his chest. The finest piece of engineering in the sky. Not that a lugnut turner like you would understand the aerodynamics involved. I understand that the Kestrel uses a dual harmonic swashplate design, Garrett stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Preston's smirk faltered slightly. That was proprietary information. So what? So, Garrett leaned back, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The harmonic vibration at a sustained hover over salt water creates a microfracture feedback loop in the titanium pitch links. At exactly 3,000 flight hours, those links will snap under heavy load. The rotor will detach, and your finest piece of engineering will drop out of the sky like a stone. The color rapidly drained from Preston's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at Garrett, genuine panic flashing in his eyes. You're making that up? Preston stammered, his arrogant posture completely collapsing. That's impossible. Our simulations... Your simulations are modeled for dry desert air, not corrosive oceanic crosswinds, Garrett interrupted coldly. You have a fatal design flaw, Mr. Vance. You might want to fix that before you put American sailors in those coffins. Garrett then turned his attention to his daughter, his expression instantly softening into pure warmth. All right, Chloe Bear. It's getting late. Time to get you home to bed. Vivian sat frozen in her chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched in stunned silence as this supposedly poor, uneducated mechanic systematically dismantled the CEO of a rival aerospace empire with a few sentences, possessing knowledge that defied all logic. Preston Vance's face flushed a violent, mottled red. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive silk collar. To be humiliated in front of the apex predators of the city's elite was one thing. But to be dismantled by a man wearing a $30 denim shirt was an injury his massive ego could not sustain. You do not turn your back on me, Preston hissed, stepping forward and reaching a hand out to grab Garrett's shoulder. What happened next was so fast, Vivian almost missed it. Garrett didn't shout. He didn't throw a punch. As Preston's hand closed the distance, Garrett smoothly pivoted. His posture shifted in a fraction of a second from a relaxed father to a coiled spring of lethal violence. He didn't even touch Preston. He merely stepped directly into the billionaire's personal space, towering over him, his eyes going dead and flat. I am taking my daughter home, Mr. Vance, Garrett said softly, his voice dropping to a terrifying gravelly register that did not carry beyond their immediate circle. Do not reach for me again. You will not like the outcome. Preston froze entirely. The arrogance drained from his eyes, replaced by a sudden, primal, flashing terror. He slowly lowered his hand, taking a clumsy step backward, bumping into an empty chair. He had recognized what Vivian recognized. That was not the posturing of a barroom brawler. That was the absolute chilling composure of a man who had ended lives and was politely deciding not to end his. Garrett held his gaze for one more suffocating second before turning away. He gently took Chloe's small hand in his. "Come on, sweetheart. The stars are waiting." Chloe beamed, waving happily at Leo. "Bye, Leo. Bye, lady who builds airplanes." Leo pressed his hands flat against the mahogany table, his lower lip trembling slightly as he watched them walk away. The immense dining room of Apex Point felt 10 times colder the moment Garrett Mercer walked out the door. Vivian sat in stunned silence, the rhythmic, calming cadence the mechanic had used to soothe her son still echoing in her mind. 30 minutes later, Vivian sat in the back of her armored Maybach as it glided through the neon-lit streets toward her estate. Leo was fast asleep, his head resting against her side. For the first time in his life, he hadn't needed his weighted blanket or a sedative to calm down after a public panic attack. He had just needed the steady heartbeat of a stranger. Vivian pulled out her encrypted phone and dialed her head of corporate intelligence, Marcus Thorne. "Miss Davenport," Marcus answered instantly, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Marcus, I need a complete, unrestricted background profile on a man named Garrett Mercer," Vivian commanded, staring out the tinted window at the blurred city lights. "He claims to be an aircraft structural mechanic, but tonight, he diagnosed a cascading telemetry failure on the Vanguard 9 prototype based on nothing but an overheard phone call, and he casually identified a catastrophic structural flaw in Zenith Aeronautics' new deep-water rotorcraft. He also moves like Tier 1 Special Operations." There was a brief pause on the line. "Understood. How deep do you want me to dig? I want to know where he was born, where he trained, and what kind of ghosts he's hiding." Vivian said, her voice tight. "No one walks around with that level of classified engineering knowledge while fixing cargo planes for hourly wages. Bring me everything you find by tomorrow morning." "Consider it done," Marcus replied. The next morning, the sprawling tarmac of Blackwood Airfield was deafening. The smell of ignited jet fuel and burnt rubber hung heavy in the air. Vivian arrived unannounced at Hangar 84, Davenport Aerospace's primary logistical and heavy maintenance hub. She wore a sharp charcoal pantsuit, her signature sapphire necklace replaced by a simple silver chain. She was flanked by 2 silent security details, but her mind was entirely focused on the file Marcus Thorne had delivered at dawn. The file had been shockingly thin. Almost unnervingly so, Garrett Mercer's record was a ghost town. It showed a basic mechanic certification, a few low-level clearances, and a blank gap of nearly 12 years where his employment history simply vanished. The military databases had flagged the search with a Level 5 restricted access warning. Whoever Garrett Mercer was, the Department of Defense had spent a lot of time and effort erasing him from the public record. As Vivian strode across the polished concrete floor of the massive hangar, a loud, echoing voice shattered her concentration. "I don't pay you to think, Mercer. I pay you to turn wrenches and sign the damn sheet." Vivian stopped. 70 yards away, standing beneath the towering wing of a colossal C-170 transport freighter, was Elias Cobb. Cobb was the senior hangar manager, a loud, aggressive man known for cutting corners to meet brutal turnaround deadlines. Right now, he was red in the face, aggressively poking his thick finger into the chest of a man in standard-issue Davenport coveralls. It was Garrett. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, hinting that he had come straight from his courier job to the morning shift at the hangar. He was holding a digital micrometer and a heavy metal clipboard. The locking pins on the aft cargo ramp actuator are showing microscopic shear stress. Garrett stated calmly, not backing away an inch as Cobb screamed in his face. "The tolerance is off by 3 millimeters. If this freighter hits a sustained thermal updraft over the Pacific with a full payload, the acoustic resonance will snap the pins. The ramp will blow open at 30,000 feet. It's within factory parameters," Cobb bellowed, his voice echoing off the aluminum walls. "This shipment is already 4 hours late. It is a $50 million payload, and I am not grounding this bird because some grease-stained line worker thinks he's an aerospace engineer. Sign the release form, or you're fired on the spot." Garrett looked at the clipboard, then slowly looked back at Cobb. There was no fear in his eyes, only a profound, exhausted disappointment. "I won't sign a death warrant for a flight crew just so you can make your quarterly bonus, Elias," Garrett said quietly. Cobb let out a roar of frustration and lunged forward, grabbing the clipboard out of Garrett's hands. "Then pack up your locker, you arrogant piece of trash. You're done in this industry." I'll make sure you never touch a plane again. He won't be packing anything, a cold, razor-sharp voice echoed across the floor. Cobb spun around, his angry expression instantly melting into sheer, pale terror as Vivian Davenport stepped out from the shadow of the massive aircraft wing, her security detail flanking her like wolves. Garrett didn't look surprised. He just let out a slow breath and wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, locking eyes with the billionaire CEO who was slowly realizing that the man standing before her was not just a mechanic, but a man who operated on a moral frequency completely alien to her world of corporate greed. Elias Cobb spun around, his jaw dropping so low it looked as if it might unhinge. The aggressive, bullying sneer that had mapped his face a second ago dissolved into a pale, sweat-sheened mask of terror. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, high-pitched squeak emerged before he managed to swallow hard and find his voice. He began stammering, telling Miss Davenport that she shouldn't be in this section of the airfield without a hard hat, and trying to explain that he was just dealing with a case of extreme insubordination from a low-level line worker who was trying to intentionally delay a critical military transport. Vivian didn't look at Cobb. Her razor-sharp eyes remained locked on Garrett, who calmly tossed his grease rag into a nearby bin. She walked past the shaking hangar manager, the rhythmic click of her designer heels echoing against the high aluminum rafters like a countdown timer. She stopped directly in front of Garrett, reached out, and pulled the heavy metal clipboard out of Cobb's limp fingers. She looked down at the handwritten notes Garrett had made in the margins of the flight clearance log. The handwriting was incredibly precise, written with the flawless, block-letter clarity of a master draftsman or a tactical coordinator. She looked up, her expression unreadable. She asked Garrett to explain his diagnosis again, specifically the part about the 3mm tolerance deviation on the aft cargo ramp actuator. Cobb tried to cut in, loudly insisting that the factory manuals allowed for a variance, and that grounding a $50 million defense payload over a microscopic hairline fracture would cause Davenport Aerospace to default on its delivery schedule to the Pentagon. Vivian merely raised a single, elegant hand, silencing Cobb instantly without even glancing in his direction. She kept her focus entirely on Garrett. Garrett didn't hesitate. He stepped up to the massive, exposed hydraulic assembly of the C-170 transport freighter, pointing a calloused finger at the base of the heavy titanium locking pins. He explained that at high altitudes, the high bypass turbofans generated a specific low-frequency harmonic resonance that traveled through the rear fuselage. He stated that when the aircraft encountered severe thermal updrafts over the ocean, the air pressure differentials combined with that structural vibration would cause a microscopic shear stress feedback loop. Within 40 minutes of sustained flight, the grade 5 titanium pins would suffer a catastrophic crystallization failure, snapping instantly. The massive cargo ramp would tear away from the airframe at 30,000 feet, depressurizing the cabin and pulling the flight crew right out into the sky. Before Vivian could process the terrifying depth of his technical accuracy, the heavy security doors at the far end of Hangar 84 slammed open with a deafening crash. A convoy of black government vehicles tore onto the polished concrete floor, their tires screeching to a halt just 20 yards away. From the lead SUV stepped General Donald Briggs, the notoriously short-tempered director of the Defense Logistics Agency. He was flanked by 4 armed military escorts, his face flushed with anger as he marched directly toward Vivian. General Briggs demanded to know why the transport freighter was still sitting on the tarmac, shouting that the Pentagon's Joint Chiefs were waiting at the primary evaluation site and that any further delay would result in the immediate suspension of Davenport Aerospace's defense bidding privileges. Cobb saw his opportunity to deflect blame and stepped forward, pointing aggressively at Garrett, claiming that this incompetent, low-wage grease monkey was refusing to sign the maintenance release forms over an imaginary safety concern. Vivian felt the crushing weight of her entire corporate legacy resting on her shoulders. If she delayed the flight, her company faced financial ruin and public disgrace. If she allowed it to take off, and Garrett was right, a brave military flight crew would perish in a horrific accident. She looked at General Briggs, then looked back at Garrett. She saw the absolute, unshakable calm in the mechanic's green eyes. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't afraid of the general, the multi-billion-dollar contract, or the corporate pressure. He simply stood there like a mountain. Vivian turned her gaze back to Cobb, her voice dropping to a freezing, absolute register. She told Cobb that he was stripped of his management badge and fired effective immediately for attempting to falsify a flight safety log. Cobb gasped, his face turning completely white as two of Vivian's security guards stepped forward and firmly escorted him off the premises. She then turned to Garrett, asking him if the actuator pins could be completely replaced right here on the hangar floor without towing the massive aircraft back to the primary manufacturing facility. Garrett looked at his watch, calculating the logistics in a split second. He told her it could be done in exactly 20 minutes, but only if he was given absolute command of the entire Hangar 84 maintenance crew and direct access to the high-precision machine shop. Vivian didn't hesitate. She looked out across the dozens of stunned mechanics who were watching the drama unfold and announced at the top of her lungs that Garrett Mercer was now in absolute control of the hangar floor, ordering everyone to obey his directives without question. The moment the words left her mouth, Garrett's entire demeanor underwent a terrifying transformation. The quiet, tired father vanished completely. He stepped forward, his chest squared, his voice booming across the massive hangar with a thunderous, undeniable authority that carried the unmistakable weight of a high-ranking military commander. He began barking out highly specialized logistics and machining codes, directing teams of engineers to grab specific titanium blanks and pneumatic drills. The crew, sensing the terrifying power radiating from him, moved like a clockwork army, throwing themselves into the repair work with frantic speed. General Briggs stood by Vivian's side, his angry expression slowly morphing into deep bewilderment as he watched the mechanic orchestrate the complex structural repair with flawless precision. Because of the intense heat radiating from the massive hydraulic lines under the wing, Garrett unzipped the top half of his heavy canvas coveralls, tying the sleeves around his waist to reveal a grease-stained gray undershirt. As Garrett reached high into the actuator housing to align the newly machined locking pins, the fabric of his shirt stretched tight across his broad shoulders. General Briggs stepped closer, his eyes scanning the mechanic's exposed right shoulder, where a jagged, severe shrapnel scar crossed directly through a deeply faded, highly restricted military tactical tattoo. It was the crest of the Ghost Squadron, a legendary, ultra-classified black operations aviation unit whose members officially did not exist. General Briggs froze entirely, the breath catching in his throat. He took a slow, disbelieving step forward, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock as he stared at the mechanic's profile. He recognized the precise, authoritative cadence of the voice commanding the hangar. He recognized the flawless tactical coordination. He realized exactly who was standing under the wing of that transport plane. "My God," General Briggs whispered, his voice shaking with a sudden, profound reverence that left Vivian utterly stunned. "It can't be. You're him." The silence inside Hangar 84 became deafening, drowning out the distant roar of nearby jet engines on the tarmac. General Briggs, a man who answered only to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the President, slowly brought his right hand up to his brow, locking his boots together with a crisp, echoing snap. He was saluting a man covered in industrial grease and sweat. The dozens of Davenport mechanics standing on the scaffolding froze. Tools went silent. Vivian Davenport felt a chill ripple down her spine as she watched the seasoned four-star general look at her hourly line worker with an expression bordering on religious awe. Garrett didn't salute back. He merely sighed, a deep, weary sound that carried the weight of 100 lifetimes. He reached up, gently tapping the general's elbow to signal him to drop the formal protocol. "I don't go by that title anymore, Donald," Garrett said, his voice quiet but steady. "I told you when I walked away from the Pentagon, my name is just Garrett. I'm a mechanic. Nothing more. With all due respect, sir, you could wear a trash bag and you'd still be the most dangerous tactical mind in the military," General Briggs replied, his voice uncharacteristically thick with emotion. He turned sharply to Vivian, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Miss Davenport, do you have any earthly idea who is standing on your hangar floor?" Vivian swallowed hard, her composure slipping for the first time in years. "General," his file was heavily redacted. Level 5 restrictions. My intelligence head couldn't pierce the firewall. Briggs let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Of course it was redacted. You're looking at Commander Garrett Mercer, the phantom architect of the Ghost Squadron. The only human being to successfully test fly the experimental dark matter stealth interceptors through contested airspace. He didn't just fly them, Miss Davenport. He engineered the thrust vectoring algorithms from scratch. 3 years ago, when his squad was ambushed over the Pacific, he single-handedly flew into a surface-to-air missile grid, drew the fire of 12 enemy batteries, saved 48 American service members, and brought a burning aircraft back to a carrier deck with no hydraulics and one wing. A collective gasp rippled through the hangar. The mechanics, who had spent weeks treating Garrett like an invisible, low-wage laborer, looked at him as if he had just dropped from the heavens. Vivian looked at Garrett, her mind spinning violently. The quiet masculinity, the absolute fearlessness in the face of Preston Vance, the flawless diagnosis of the Vanguard 9 engine, it all made sense now. He wasn't guessing. He was the very reason those technologies existed. Commander General Briggs said, stepping closer, ignoring the grease staining his immaculate dress uniform. The Tactical Aviation Division has been in shambles since you resigned. The Joint Chiefs have an open checkbook waiting for you. Why are you doing hourly maintenance work in a commercial hangar? Garrett picked up a heavy torque wrench, his eyes fixed on the newly replaced titanium locking pins of the C-170 transport freighter. He didn't look back at the general. Because a cockpit is a place for a man who has something to lose, Donald, Garrett murmured, his voice cracking slightly with a deeply buried raw sorrow. I lost my wife 3 years ago. I promised my daughter Chloe that her father would never disappear into the clouds again. My time belongs to her now. If I'm fixing cargo planes, I go home at 5. If I'm flying stealth prototypes, I'm a ghost. I'm done being a ghost. Vivian felt a powerful, aching squeeze in her chest. The sheer sacrifice of the man was staggering. He had traded global glory, infinite wealth, and the highest honors a nation could bestow, all to ensure his little girl never had to wonder if her father was coming home. It was the exact opposite of Vivian's life, where she constantly sacrificed her son, Leo's childhood, to build a corporate empire. Garrett pulled the wrench tight, a sharp click signaling that the actuator pins were perfectly calibrated to the exact micrometer. He slid out from beneath the fuselage, adjusting his heavy coveralls. The C-170 is fully secured, General, Garrett stated, his tone shifting back to business. The harmonic resonance won't affect the aft ramp anymore. Your flight crew will make it to the evaluation site safely. You can clear the bird for takeoff. General Briggs stared at the perfectly aligned hydraulic assembly, then looked at Vivian. The anger that the general had brought into the hangar was entirely gone, replaced by absolute, unyielding respect. Miss Davenport, General Briggs said loudly, ensuring every worker in the hangar heard him. Your former manager, Cobb, was a fool who nearly cost this country an invaluable flight crew. But because you had the wisdom to put Commander Mercer in charge of this floor, Davenport Aerospace is officially awarded the exclusive 10-year defense transport contract, effective immediately. The hangar erupted into cheers. Mechanics clapped, threw their hats in the air, and stared at Garrett with profound admiration. It was a multi-billion-dollar triumph that secured Vivian's legacy forever. But Vivian barely heard the cheering. She was staring at Garrett, who simply offered a small, polite nod, picked up his toolbox, and began walking toward the washrooms to clean the grease from his arms. He didn't care about the billions. He didn't care about the praise. Suddenly, the heavy steel security doors of the hangar opened again. Marcus Thorne, Vivian's head of corporate intelligence, ran onto the floor, his face pale, gasping for air. He held an unredacted paper file in his hands, his eyes darting frantically around the room until they landed on Vivian. Miss Davenport! Marcus yelled, sprinting up to her, completely ignoring the presence of the 4-star general. He thrust the folder into her hands. You need to see this immediately. I finally bypassed the final military firewall. Garrett Mercer didn't just walk away because his wife died. Vivian's breath hitched. What do you mean, Marcus? Marcus pointed a trembling finger at the leaked corporate board documents attached to the back of the military file. The corrupt defense contractor that supplied the faulty, substandard engine components that caused his wife's military medical transport plane to crash 3 years ago. It wasn't a random supplier, Vivian. It was a shell company owned entirely by Zenith Aeronautics, and Preston Vance just found out that Garrett is working for you. The paper folder in Vivian Davenport's hands felt as heavy as a lead weight. Her eyes scanned the unredacted documents, her mind racing to connect the complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and falsified safety certifications. The evidence was undeniable. The structural failure that had caused the tragic crash of the military medical transport 3 years ago had been directly caused by defective, substandard titanium alloy brackets. And the manufacturer of those brackets was a hidden subsidiary entirely controlled by Zenith Aeronautics. General Donald Briggs stepped closer, his face turning an angry, deep shade of crimson as he looked over Vivian's shoulder. He stared at the signature on the final engineering waiver, his fists clenching at his sides until his knuckles turned stark white. Preston Vance. General Briggs growled, his voice vibrating with a dangerous, suppressed fury. That absolute coward. He knew his aerospace division couldn't match the structural integrity of Commander Mercer's designs, so he cut corners, bribed inspectors, and buried the audit reports. He killed an entire flight crew, and he stole this man's wife just to protect his profit margins. The massive hangar fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. The cheering of the mechanics died out instantly, replaced by a tense, breathless dread. Everyone turned their eyes toward Garrett Mercer. Garrett stood completely still under the towering wing of the C-170 transport freighter. The heavy torque wrench remained in his grip, his calloused fingers tightening around the metal handle until it slightly creaked. He didn't shout. He didn't smash a tool against the concrete floor. The terrifying calm that washed over his face was far worse than any explosive display of anger. His deep green eyes went flat, dark, and utterly devoid of life, taking on the chilling expression of a sniper locking onto a target. Vivian took a slow, hesitant step toward him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had faced down hostile corporate takeovers, ruthless hedge fund managers, and corrupt politicians, but looking into Garrett's eyes right now made her blood run cold. "Garrett," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling with a raw, genuine empathy she hadn't felt in a decade. "I am so incredibly sorry. If I had known that my supply lines or my competitors were tied to your past, I would have—" "I knew the telemetry was falsified," Garrett interrupted, his voice shockingly quiet, yet carrying an icy weight that cut through the cavernous hangar. He slowly set the torque wrench down on a metal cart, his movements deliberate and precise. "When I was in the cockpit trying to guide that burning transport down via radio, the numbers didn't make sense. The hydraulic lines didn't just leak, they disintegrated. The Pentagon buried the secondary investigation because Zenith Aeronautics was the primary defense contractor for the Tactical Rotorcraft Initiative. They told me it was a random mechanical anomaly. They told me to take my pension and go home." He turned his head slowly, looking at Marcus Thorne, who was still catching his breath. "How did Vance find out I was working here?" "When you diagnosed the Vanguard 9 engine failure over the phone at the restaurant last night, Vivian yelled the corrective sequence across the entire dining room," Marcus explained, his eyes wide with anxiety. "Vance is many things, but he isn't stupid. He knows only one man in the entire world possesses the engineering genius to calculate a variable stator vane phase lockout in a matter of seconds. He ran your facial profile through his own corporate security database this morning. He knows exactly who you are now, Commander." Before Vivian could speak, her private satellite phone rang again. She answered it immediately, her face pale as she braced for the next blow. "Vivian, you need to get to the corporate headquarters right now." Arthur Pendleton's voice panicked through the line, sounding completely defeated. Vance just struck back. "He leaked a heavily altered, fabricated set of engineering logs from our primary server to the Federal Aviation Oversight Committee. He's claiming Davenport Aerospace has been knowingly utilizing flawed structural designs on all military prototypes. The external shareholders are dumping stock. The board of directors has just called an emergency closed-door meeting at Davenport Tower. They are executing the emergency leadership clause to strip you of your CEO title in exactly 30 minutes. Vivian gripped the phone, her knuckles turning white. Preston Vance wasn't just trying to protect his business. He was trying to utterly annihilate her, seize control of her legacy, and permanently silence the one man who could expose his corporate crimes. She lowered the phone, her breathing shallow as the immense pressure of the situation threatened to crush her. She looked at Garrett, feeling a sudden, desperate sense of isolation. She was the most powerful woman in the aerospace industry, yet in this moment, her billions were completely useless against a calculated, vicious ambush. Garrett walked slowly across the polished concrete floor, stopping just inches away from Vivian. The heavy canvas coveralls tied around his waist and the grease stains on his undershirt stood in stark contrast to her immaculate charcoal pantsuit, yet he was the one who radiated absolute, unyielding control. He looked past her, toward the far corner of the hangar where his daughter, Chloe, was currently laughing, showing Leo how to fold a perfect paper airplane out of a discarded blueprint. Leo was smiling, his small face completely free of the anxiety that usually dictated his life. Garrett looked back at Vivian, his green eyes softening just a fraction as he saw the pure terror hiding behind her icy corporate mask. "You saved my daughter from being humiliated in that restaurant last night, Miss Davenport," Garrett said softly, his voice low and steady. "And you fired a corrupt manager to protect a flight crew today. You care about the people who fly your machines. That makes you a rare breed in this world." Vivian swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Garrett, they are going to take my company. They are going to use Vance's fake logs to destroy everything my family built." "No, they aren't," Garrett said, his chest squaring as his military posture returned in full force. He turned to General Briggs, his voice taking on the undeniable command of a high-ranking tactical leader. "Donald, get your transport crew ready for departure. Secure the airfield. Nobody leaves this base without your direct authorization." "Sir, yes, sir," General Briggs responded instantly, snapping a flawless salute. Garrett then looked back at Vivian, a faint, dangerous smirk touching the corner of his lips. "Miss Davenport, order your helicopter. We are going to that board meeting." It's time to show Preston Vance what happens when he tries to ground a ghost. The atmosphere inside the penthouse boardroom of Davenport Tower was suffocating. High above the sprawling city, the 60-foot mahogany table was surrounded by the nervous, whispering elite of the aerospace industry. Arthur Pendleton sat near the back, his head buried in his hands, completely defeated by the sudden, catastrophic plunge in Davenport stock. Standing at the head of the table, bathed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, was Preston Vance. Preston wore a perfectly tailored Italian suit, his chest puffed out with the arrogant pride of a conqueror. He was currently projecting a series of highly technical, falsified engineering logs onto the massive digital display screen, systematically dismantling Vivian's reputation to the horrified board of directors. He spoke with a sickeningly smooth rhythm, feigning deep concern for the safety of the American military while positioning his own company, Zenith Aeronautics, as the only logical savior to buy out Davenport's failing assets. The board members were already nodding, reaching for their pens to sign the emergency resolution that would strip Vivian of her absolute authority. Preston smiled, savoring the final seconds of his ultimate victory. Then, the massive, brass-reinforced oak doors of the boardroom violently shattered inward. The heavy wood slammed against the marble walls with a deafening crack that made every billionaire in the room flinch. Vivian Davenport walked through the threshold. She did not look like a defeated CEO coming to beg for her job. She looked like a queen executing a siege. Her posture was flawless, her eyes burning with a terrifying, cold fire. "You are late for your own execution, Vivian." Preston sneered, though his smirk faltered slightly at the sheer venom in her gaze. "The board has already reviewed the logs. Your negligence is a matter of federal record now. Security should have stopped you at the lobby." "Security works for me, Preston," Vivian said, her voice echoing off the glass walls like a physical strike. "And so do the people who actually build the future." She stepped to the side. Garrett Mercer walked into the boardroom. He had not changed his clothes. He still wore the heavy, grease-stained canvas coveralls tied around his waist and the faded gray undershirt. His forearms were slick with industrial oil, and his boots left faint, dark tracks on the pristine white marble floor. He looked entirely out of place among the silk ties and Rolex watches, yet the moment he stepped into the room, the air pressure seemed to drop. The casual, terrifying lethality radiating from him paralyzed the entire board. General Donald Briggs marched in immediately behind Garrett, flanked by 6 heavily armed federal military police officers. Preston's face drained of color. He looked from the 4-star general to the mechanic, his mind frantically trying to process the nightmare unfolding in front of him. "What is this? General Briggs, what are you doing here? And why did you bring this grease monkey into a classified corporate meeting?" Garrett did not say a word. He walked with a slow, heavy, measured pace directly toward Preston. The board members physically shrank back in their plush leather chairs as he passed. Garrett stopped at the head of the table, standing inches away from the billionaire CEO. He reached into the pocket of his coveralls and pulled out the thick, unredacted military file Marcus Thorne had delivered. He dropped it onto the polished mahogany with a heavy, final thud. "My name is Commander Garrett Mercer," Garrett stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a violent shiver down Preston's spine. "Architect of the Ghost Squadron, and the husband of Captain Sarah Mercer, the pilot you murdered 3 years ago." A collective gasp echoed through the room. The board members stared in absolute shock. The legend of the Ghost Squadron was whispered in the highest circles of defense contracting, a phantom unit of unparalleled aviation genius. To see the man standing in front of them, dressed as a line mechanic, broke their reality. Preston stepped back, his back hitting the glass window. His arrogance vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He began to stammer, shaking his head rapidly. I don't know what you are talking about. The crash was a mechanical anomaly. The Pentagon cleared it. The Pentagon cleared a dummy corporation, General Briggs boomed, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with Garrett. The general glared at Preston with absolute disgust. A shell company that we just finished tracing back to your personal offshore accounts, Vance. You authorized the use of substandard titanium alloys to undercut Davenport's bids. When Commander Mercer's wife noticed the hydraulic decay during a medical transport, you panicked. You paid inspectors to look the other way. Her plane disintegrated at 20,000 feet because of your greed. No, Preston shouted, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. He pointed a trembling finger at the digital display. Look at the logs. Davenport is the one falsifying data. Look at the Vanguard 9. Garrett reached out and slammed his heavy, calloused hand flat onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Those logs are poorly fabricated garbage, Garrett said coldly, staring directly into Preston's terrified eyes. You modeled the thermal decay using a base-level thermodynamic algorithm. You forgot to account for the kinetic friction coefficient of the bypass valves at supersonic speeds. It's an amateur mistake. Because you aren't an engineer, Preston. You're just a thief in a silver suit. Garrett turned his head slightly toward the military police. Take him. The officers moved with brutal efficiency. They grabbed Preston by his arms, slamming him face first onto the mahogany table. The sound of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around the billionaire's wrists echoed through the dead silence of the boardroom. Preston sobbed openly, his pristine suit ruined, his legacy completely annihilated in a matter of seconds. As they dragged him out of the room, he didn't even have the strength to look back. The boardroom remained perfectly still. The directors stared at Vivian, their faces pale, realizing how close they had come to destroying the company. The chairman of the board slowly stood up, clearing his throat nervously, attempting to formulate a desperate apology. Vivian, Miss Davenport, the chairman stammered. We were misled. We had no idea of the depths of Vance's deception. Please, we ask that you resume your total authority over the— You don't ask me for anything, Vivian interrupted, her voice a soft, lethal blade. She walked to the head of the table, standing where Preston had just been destroyed. Every single one of you who entertained that emergency resolution is stepping down by midnight. If you refuse, I will personally ensure your shares are diluted to pennies. Get out of my boardroom. Within 60 seconds, the room was empty, save for Vivian, Garrett, and Arthur Pendleton, who was weeping with silent relief. 2 hours later, the chaotic noise of the city faded into the tranquil silence of Vivian's sprawling private estate. The golden hues of the setting sun cast long, warm shadows across the immaculate, manicured lawns. Vivian stood on the edge of the stone terrace, holding a glass of iced water. She had shed her corporate jacket, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. She watched as Leo and Chloe ran across the grass, chasing a golden retriever puppy that Vivian's staff had brought out. Leo was laughing a loud, genuine, uninhibited sound that Vivian had never heard before this week. Chloe was holding his hand, pulling him along. The two children, completely inseparable. Garrett stepped out onto the terrace. He had finally washed the grease from his arms and changed into a clean, simple black Henley and dark jeans. He looked at his daughter, a soft, weary smile touching his lips. Vivian turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The absolute power she wielded in the boardroom felt completely insignificant compared to the quiet strength of the man standing beside her. You could have asked for anything today, Vivian said softly. General Briggs practically offered you the entire tactical division. You could have walked away with billions, Garrett. Why did you come back here? Garrett looked down at her, his deep green eyes locking onto hers. The defensive walls he had built around his heart for 3 years were finally crumbling. He reached out, his warm, scarred hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind Vivian's ear. I told the general I was done being a ghost, Garrett murmured, his thumb lightly tracing the line of her jaw. Ghosts don't get to watch their children smile. They don't get to feel the sun on their face. And they don't get to hold a woman who is brave enough to fight for her family. Vivian's breath hitched. She leaned into his touch, a profound sense of peace washing over her. For her entire life, she had built impenetrable walls of wealth and logic to keep the world away. She had thought she was protecting her son, but she had only been isolating him. Garrett hadn't just saved her company, he had shattered her walls and shown her what it meant to truly live. Leo suddenly broke away from the dog, running up the stone steps. He didn't run to his mother. He ran directly to Garrett, wrapping his small arms tightly around the man's legs. "Are you going to stay, Garrett?" Leo asked, his voice full of innocent, desperate hope. "Are you going to build planes with Mom forever?" Garrett knelt down, placing a hand on Leo's shoulder, and then looked up at Vivian. The question hung in the warm evening air, loaded with a promise that went far beyond aerospace contracts and corporate titles. "Yeah, buddy." Garrett smiled, pulling Leo into a hug as Vivian knelt beside them, wrapping her arms around both of them. "I'm staying. We're going to build something beautiful."